So I'm excited to introduce our panel and our moderator. So I'm just going to do some brief introductions, and then I'll pass it on to the panelists so that they can introduce themselves more fully. So first, Tracy Baim is our moderator tonight. Tracy's worked as a journalist in Chicago since 1984. She's an author and an activist, and we could not have done our exhibits without her books, many of which are here. And she's currently the publisher of the Chicago Reader. And then Pat McCombs co-founded Executive Suite, which was a traveling party for women of color in 1980. And then Pat fought against discrimination in Chicago's lesbian bars in the 1970s, which is something we talk about in the exhibit, and ran the Women of Color tent at the Michigan Women's Music Festival for over 30 years. And then we have Kathy Munzer, who's been an active feminist in Chicago since the 1970s. After coming out in 1978, she joined the Mountain Moving Coffee House Collective in 1981, serving as a collective member and co-producer for 24 years. And then Mona Noriega has been an activist in Chicago since the 1970s, fighting especially for Latina Lesbians as a member of LENA and co-founder of Amigas Latinas. And then we have Linda Boobin, Linda's been active in the Chicago feminist community also since the 1970s, co-founding Women and Children First, which is now one of the largest feminist bookstores in the country in 1979. So I'll pass, yeah.
We're going to stand up when we talk, so I hope that helps a little bit, because I'm short. I can appreciate the pain of it. So I'm Tracy Baim. What we're going to do is have a conversation tonight. We're going to go through and talk a little bit about some of the things that maybe brought us to this table here. But this room is also quite intimidating because there's many a story in this room and in the chairs of people who were active in the 60s and 70s. So we're going to leave time at the end for you to tell those stories and ask questions of our panelists, which I'm honored to be here tonight. So why don't we start with Pat? We'll go down the row. Just kind of a little bit more about yourselves and the role you had in this community. Can you hear me? Just want to know.
Well, first of all, I started out going to numerous meetings on the North Side and was quite interested in various activities. And going to the various bars, I had a little problem. Well, a group of us had problems with a particular bar, Augie's and CK's, the name. And we decided to picket the bar. And because they were discriminating against women of color in terms of entry, if we decided to go in, if 4 of us would enter the bar, 2 of us might get in because they said something was wrong with our identification. For instance, they said, what really pissed me off and made me really just start doing something was when they asked women of color for green cards. And at the time, a green card was a public aid identification card, which you used to get certain services, and that they assumed all of us were on public aid, which I was extremely angry about. And I think that's what initially aroused my anger to do something about it, rather than just talk about it among friends. And that's when we organized the picket. In the process of doing that, I got with a group of women and we decided to give our own parties and not really have to go to those places since they were discriminating against us. We say, let's do our own thing and come about Executive Suite. And since we didn't have one central location, what we did is we would travel around in different areas, north side and downtown areas, stop at different bars who didn't have much business. Maybe on Friday and Saturday nights, and talk with the owner and ask them, look, we pay you a certain fee and you let us come and have a party. When we initially started, we didn't let them know it was all women. We made them think it was a sorority, and we decided to have a social gathering. But as time went on, we had to change that because we didn't want discrimination with the bar owners or their workers. When they see a bunch of women together, they start to figure out among, putting 2 plus 2 together, they figure, well, this is not a sorority. So we decided to do travel around to different bars and really nice bars where we would have the women dress up, and then we'd have different social events throughout the year, boat rides, workshops. We did all kinds of stuff. But that's initially how it started.
Great.
Well,
I think we probably should use the mic because they're recording it.
Okay.
Oh, okay. I didn't want to interrupt.
Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. I'm gonna use an outline, because that's how I roll. Okay, I came out in '78, and I started taking feminist philosophy classes at Northeastern University. I joined Mountain Moving and was a collective member and co-producer from 1981 to 2005 for 24 years. I attended the Michigan Women's Music Festival from the beginning, and also worked there and at the East Coast Lesbian Festival for a time as performer support. For the last 28 years, I've been a collective member of the Institute of Lesbian Studies, a monthly lesbian feminist discussion group. I still attend festivals, the National Women's Music Festival near Madison, the Ohio Lesbian Festival, and other lesbian feminist gatherings and conferences. When it came out in '78, there was already a rich lesbian feminist culture. There was a circuit for women's music performers, writers, activists. There were managers and bookers and producers, record labels, record companies, and venues like bookstores, churches, schools, and coffee houses that welcomed lesbian culture. And I'll talk about Mount Moving later on.
I think we're all amazed that you all are here. So my name's Mona. I came out in the late 70s, and actually I went to Sarah Hoagland's first philosophy class, and I had no idea I didn't know what a feminist was. I thought it was a woman who was feminine. I just had no clue about any of that stuff. So I did come out in the late 70s, and in the 80s, when I came out, I did not see anybody like me. Most of the women were white. None of them had children. We had a whole separatism kind of thing going on. And so one of my primary tasks was try to normalize what being a lesbian was for my children. And so what that meant is I had to organize women, and mostly they were women of color. And we would have picnics, and we would, have Mother's Day parties, and from there, I became an activist. I didn't know I was an activist. And from there, we went to women of all colors at Mountain Moving Coffee House. We used to perform because we were always trying to look for more women. We're always trying to recruit people. Yes, we were recruiters, man. And then we did Yena and Amigas Latinas, and it just took off. And I guess that's how I became an activist. I didn't know that I was one, and all of a sudden I looked around and yeah, I was.
Hi, I'm Linda. I guess about the mid-'70s when I was in graduate school, and I fell in love with one of my classmates, and she and I were finishing our master's degrees, and it was looking really difficult to get a PhD and have somebody pay for it. And I hadn't paid for my education up to that point, and I wasn't about to start. So now, it's just sickening to me what kids have to pay to go to school. But, at that time, you could get scholarships, you could get grants, it was easy, and school was cheap. So we met there, and we decided not to do the PhD route, but to start a business. And it seemed that really the only thing we knew a lot about was literature. So a bookstore seemed the obvious choice. And we both were new feminist activists, and figured we'll have a feminist bookstore. We'll have a bookstore that caters to women and children, because where there are women, there are usually children in their lives. And literally in our grad school office, sat there on the floor and said, what are we going to call it? Women's in children's literature, women's in children's books. And then I just said, women and children first. and that became the name. And it was, we did everything DIY, built the shelves, we borrowed money from practically no one. It was really just a do-it-yourself bookshop, and the stress of it all broke us apart. So by the time we opened, we were no longer madly in love with each other.
So I'm born and raised in Chicago, and I came out in college when I went away to Des Moines, Iowa, for Drake University. But when I came back like into this incredible community that felt like it had been there for 100 years. Like it was literally, the bookstore was like 5 years old, and Mount Moving had been around a decade or so. But to me, as a young lesbian feminist, age 21, these people had created just an incredible platform of a variety of opportunities, because for many of them, they created their own family. As I said at the Equality Illinois thing a couple weeks ago, we had no choice. Many people's families didn't accept them, so you had to build your own families. And that's what I felt like I went into a robin's nest. It was ready, made for me, and if I didn't like one part of it, I could go to the other side of the nest. And there was lots of division, that's for darn sure. I jumped right into that. When I was at Gay Life newspaper, I covered a controversy at an organization whose members are represented here today. And I'm still, to this day, there are people that won't talk to me about from 1984, 5. But it was still a wonderful community. And it's because people that are at the table here, people in the room, it's something that's really hard to really define and explain, that I could actually cover this community. Like one person could actually cover it. There weren't that many people that were willing to be out and photographed. I would take pictures of softball teams, and half of them would turn their backs to be in the paper. They wanted the team photo, but they put their backs to the camera. It was really that there weren't that many people that were willing to be out and bold and activist like the folks here at the table. Matt, can you talk a little bit about how Executive Suite, what it looked like? Like paint a picture of, sometimes it was 1,000 people of different, of mostly women of color, but everybody was welcome. Like if someone wasn't there, visually explain that power.
Well, we would rent a big space, and we had, at the time, we would pass out what they call pluggers, little announcements. I would go to everything lesbian, anything related to any social gathering, anywhere. I would take a flyer and pass them out to different women and say, come to our party. Now, our particular situation, we never had anything that would say lesbian or all women on our flyers, because I was in the closet. And, because I worked for the Board of Education, and Tracy Baim tried for many years to get me to take a picture to put in the paper, which I did not do. And for years. And then finally I said, to the hell with it, everybody knows I'm a dyke. So, after a while, So, what we would do is to pass out the flyers, and we would rent this big space, and I'd have sometimes women entertaining, singing or dancing, or strippers, or sometimes, because that's what we like. And so I tried to have everything there that women liked, as far as good music, which they did. And so you would have a gathering of all these beautiful women dressed up, dancing and just socializing. I would walk around and try to make everybody feel comfortable, and we would have refreshments. And then before they left or when they came in, we had a sign-in book, which you could sign your address, and then you would be put on the mailing list for the next event. And that's how we built our crowd, because we had a mailing list about 1,500 at the time. No email during that time. We had to use stamps, and that cost quite a bit, Good Lord, somebody worked at the post office. That helped us out very well, but anyway. So, and then we had to do a lot of stuff by hand. But that's the way it kind of grew, with the word of mouth and letting women know that they could come to our event and not have to feel uncomfortable or threatened by the location. We always made sure it was close to transportation, it was lit up, and they felt safe in that space.
speaking of hand-addressed envelopes, mailing and stamps, Mount Moving Coffee House, I remember going to some mailing parties. And
Yes,
doing
yes,
the
yes,
newsletter.
yes, yeah.
Again, paint a picture. It moved to different locations.
It did.
And name some of those locations and also some of the types of acts that would come through and perform.
Got it right here. I'm ready. So the coffee house was open from 1974 to 2005, 31 years. We were the oldest running women's coffee house in the country. It was run by a collective of Chicago area lesbians, providing a social and cultural space. It was women only, suggested donation, more if you can, less if you can't, and it was chem-free. We were open every Saturday night, and only in the last few years we went down to one Saturday a month. We were always closed in August for Michigan. Initially, we were an alternative to the bars for those in recovery or those thinking about getting into recovery, and a safe space for women in abusive relationships. We were first housed with WICA, Women in Crisis Can Act, a call-in helpline. Those same lesbians also started the coffee house around the same time. It was a volunteer-only staff. We had collective members willing to come to monthly meetings and decide policies, but we also had friends of the collective. In 1991, we had 45 women on our call sheet, and in 1998, we had 72 women who we'd call to work at the door, in the kitchen, do mailings, help out at the Mini Fest, which is our yearly holiday bazaar, or put out flyers at bookstores like Women and Children, or Pat's Executive Suite, or at a Latinas Amiga meeting. We featured mostly women's music performers. We also had comedy, poetry, plays, authors, political discussions, workshops, dances, films, and of course, the lesbian staple, potlucks. We hosted women from all over the country and some global performers, like the Top Twins from New Zealand and Farron from Canada. We also featured a lot of local talent. An early producer, Tony Armstrong, published a directory which listed performers, their addresses, and their phone numbers, which really helped in booking people and also greatly expanded our audience. We were all volunteer, an all-volunteer collective, but we had to pay rent, so we made or bought baked goods and sold coffee and tea. The suggested admission price in 1974 was $2 to $4. And at the end, we were around 13 or 20. But again, it was always more if you can, less if you can't, and no one was ever turned away. We paid a percentage of the door to the performer, like around 65 or 75%. We couldn't afford to pay for transportation or hotels, so we or our friends housed the out-of-town performers. The first couple of years, the coffee house was housed on Webster Avenue at Wicca's space, then at a lesbian-run vegetarian restaurant on Sheffield called Mama Peaches. After that, we rented spaces at 3 different Methodist or Lutheran churches. We were kicked out of 2 churches. Once by a closeted, homophobic woman minister, and once due to the misogyny of a gay man whose group also rented space in the church. We were located on the north side in Lincoln Park, Lakeview, Rogers Park, and finally Andersonville. We made a conscious effort to reach out to women of color and to promote women of color performers so that our audience was more reflective of the diversity of Chicago's lesbian community. Some of the artists that performed were musicians like Farron, Kay Gardner, Linda Tillery, Mary Watkins, Margie Adam, Dietrich McCullough, Alex Dobkin, Nidra Johnson, Lucy Blue Tremblay, the Washington Sisters, and the band Alive. Comedians like Karen Williams, Kate Clinton, Suzanne Westenhofer, the lesbian cartoonist and writer of Fun Home, Alison Bechdel. Radical lesbian feminist authors like Sarah Hoagland, Julia Penelope, and Mary Daly. We hosted the Lesbian Nuns, who wrote Lesbian Nuns Breaking Silence, Chicago's own lesbian chorus, Artemis, Marie Kuda, yay, Artemis. You're in your 40th year, right, this year? Yeah, yay. Marie Kuda with her fabulous slideshows, a women of color group that billed themselves as women on the couch, with Vernita Gray, Donna Rose, Lola Lejong, Mona Noriega, and Diane Gomez. Other local performers like Paula Wolowitz, Ginny Clemens, Cece Carter, Vernita Gray, Georgette Harper, Ellen Rosner, and the band Surrender Dorothy. Some of the iconic touchstones of that time
were Our Bodies Ourselves by the Boston Women's Health Book Collective, This Bridge Called My Back by Sherry Moraga and Gloria Enzladua, the writings or poetry of Audre Lorde, Alice Walker, Nikki Giovanni, Pat Parker, the aforementioned Mary Daly, Julia Penelope, and Sarah Hoagland, Adrienne Rich, Andrea Dworkin, Bell Hooks, Kate Millett, Monique Vidic, and on and on. It truly felt like a golden age of lesbian creativity and empowerment.
So Mona, you know, first of all, we're celebrating your retirement in a month-long series of parties. Let's talk a little bit about the formation of Latina-specific organizations like YENA and Amigas Latinas, where that came from, who some of those early pioneers were, and what it did for women back then.
Well, so as you hear Pat talk, about executive suite, the reason why that was so important is because nobody was out, and so that meant that everything that we were doing, when I was organizing, I really wasn't out, even though I was trying to create safe space for my children, and we would have people to your home because you couldn't be out. And so it was really important to have spaces and find peers, because it was very alienating. And so a lot of the organizing was really just trying to find some sanity, trying to find a place where you could survive. Because otherwise, a lot of what we saw was a lot of alcoholism, suicide, depression. There was a lot of, because I was more involved, my children were small when I came out. And so I was very involved with other women who had children. I saw a lot of women who lost their children, who lived in marriages that were abusive, and or if they went to get a divorce, that their own parents would testify against them in support of the father getting the children. So it was really, really important for these institutions to, the struggle was real because the antagonism out there was so strong that a lot of what we saw was a lot of violence and a lot of alcoholism. And so these institutions that were created were life-saving. So in terms of, for me, most of the environment I came out was very white. As a mixed-race woman, I was also always looking for the other Latinas. I'd be like, where are they? And so, let me tell you, those Pat's parties, one time I went to a party at Pat's house, or Pat's, one of the places, and I could lift up my feet and I would not fall. Those parties were outrageous, and they were, and the strippers were outrageous, and but again, it gave you a sense of sanity, of humor, of community, of other women who were strong, who were fierce, who were lesbians. And when we left that bar and you went back home, you went home to your kids, sometimes you went home to your husband, and the next day you had to go back to your job and you had to pretend that you were straight again. So part of my, we were always in the search for other women and who were like us in all the ways, either race or being married or having children or academically or performance-wise. There were all different ways that we were trying to create space that reflected. None of us had a single identity. We all had multiple identities, but we were able to kind of create institutions in which we felt some sort of safety because it really was not safe then. And so looking for other Latinas that I could be reflective of was an important part. And so YENA was a very short, it was Latina Lesbianas en nuestra ambiente, which just means lesbians in our own space, in our own environment. And it was very, it was explosive actually. I had never seen that many Latina lesbians in one space before. And as in all communities, Latinas are very diverse from many countries, from many socioeconomic backgrounds, from many immigration status, from language status, all different kinds of ways. And so when you would get everybody in a room, that was before we had the idea of how to be respectful to difference, to recognize power and balance of class, of economics, all kinds of different power imbalances. And so we didn't have the words yet for that. We didn't recognize that yet. So when Yenna kind of convened, you threw a bunch of Latina lesbians in a room, and we were roaring, drunk, sleeping with each other, having fights, loving each other, creating literature, creating culture. And it was a beautiful thing. And everybody in that room was so hungry for it, just so hungry for it. It was explosive, though, and so I have to say it was short-lived because we didn't really know how to be kind to each other in the face of difference. And so Tracy, talks a little bit about, they used to call them the Chicago Lesbian Wars, but that's because people didn't know how to be nice to each other in the 80s. We were just coming out. The need was so great that when you were like moth to a flame, when you found somebody that reflected some inkling that you were hiding, it was very, you went right for it. So the next iteration was Amigas Latinas. And, Yvette tells a much better story about how Amigas Latinas came into being, but I can save that for later.
Okay. So, Linda, Women and Children First Bookstore, I have to say, I think is if you had to pick one institution that has been a through line in our community and a consistent space and place for activism and finding our community, it's Women and Children First Bookstore. Yes. The fact that you are one of a handful of feminist bookstores left in this country, and you figured out a transition plan so that bookstore is now in great hands, that you are still part of it, is incredible. That store was just a touchstone for so many people. What did it mean to you as it developed over time? Was it a positive experience for you?
I mean, we dreamed big as two graduate students with no retail experience to speak of. I had been a waitress most of my working life. I mean, I always worked. I started working when I was like 12. But I knew how to work in restaurants. I didn't know how to work in bookstores, and neither did Anne, really. She took a job in a bookstore the summer before we opened a big bookstore downtown, and we talked to everybody. In 1979, it's hard to believe, but there were more than 40 independent bookstores in Chicago, and they were all kinds of niche bookstores. We only had one chain, and it was locally owned. That was Crocs and Brentano's. Otherwise, we just had a wonderful array of independent bookstores. So Anne and I, when we decided a bookstore was going to be the thing that we would do in our life together, it would be this feminist act, and it would provide us with a living, we hoped. We didn't take a salary for 2 years because we had to grow it before it earned enough money to pay us a salary. I really thought at the time, 5 years. If we can exist 5 years as this new tide of women's liberation and women writers are beginning to get published, if we can just hang in there 5 years, by then all the general bookstores will have wonderful selections of women writers. And they will have caught on to GLBT literature, and they'll have sections. And I just assumed that they would catch on. And there wouldn't be a need for a specifically feminist bookstore. But very quickly, we learned that women were hungry for so much information that couldn't even be found in general bookstores, like about our bodies, like about raising our kids, like about being pregnant. I mean, you went into a general bookstore in the 70s, you were likely to find one book on pregnancy, maybe, or two. I mean, women were not considered. women were not, I mean, we had 800 square feet in the first bookstore. And we had trouble filling the shelves with women writers, and we wanted to be exclusively women writers. We scoured to find gay and lesbian books, well, lesbian books specifically. And we had a shelf literally this big with lesbian books, and that was all we could find, and every one of them was a small press publication. Every single one of them. From Ruby Fruit Jungle, you know, to What Color Is Your Handkerchief? Does anybody remember that?
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the sex wars of the 80s and, you know, lesbians finding each other, but then also finding separatists and finding Latina lesbians to hang out with, and finding black lesbians to hang out with, and finding lesbians who were into S&M to hang out with, and finding lesbians who were into working on reproductive rights. And so there was, you know, everybody was kind of finding their own niche in the community too. And it's a big city. You know, if people would come here from Madison and say, well, where do all the lesbians hang out? It's like, well, some of them hang out in Hyde Park, and some of them hang out in Lincoln Park, and some of them hang out in Boys Town, and, you know, we're a big city, and there's just all kinds of women here. And as we started, we knew we wanted to be a place where people would come together and have discussions, like, do we tolerate S&M activities in our lesbian community? Is this a healthy thing for us to practice? We had 90 people, like about as many people as here now, crowding into this tiny bookstore, sitting on the shag carpeting. And this was like painfully important to all of us to define our ethics as lesbians and to define our ethics in relationships. Those issues, and then issues among white women and women of color, and figuring out how to be allies, and figuring out how to include everybody. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. And, you know, like I said, we operated on a shoestring for the first 5 years, and then we moved to a bigger store and actually hired a couple of people to work with us. And, you know, it grew from there. We moved in 1990 up to the Andersonville location. We've expanded in place in that location. And then 5 years ago, my business partner, Ann Christofferson, who's going to be here tonight, so I can introduce her. But I brought the scrapbook so you can see pictures of her in there. We decided we were getting too old to keep the store vibrant. We were just losing energy. It had been 35 years. So we looked for new owners, and we found two fantastic feminists, and they're running the store beautifully, better than I could have ever expected. That, I know you have to dream it. You have to dream it before it comes true. And I will tell you, I dreamed the bookstore, I dreamed its growth and expansion, and I dreamed my retirement. Yeah, right? And it wasn't that we were going to close this store that we built from, you know, built our own shelves from the, we're just too stubborn. It had to continue. So we found good caretakers.
Excellent. You know, looking back, there was a lot more intergenerational stuff happening because out of necessity, because we didn't have a lot of options to separate as much, although there was some separations. Who were some of the women you might have met as young folks in this community that were the older generation then? How did you, did you interact with them? Who were some of the role models you had? If you didn't have any, you didn't have any. But I know, like in '84 when I came out, not only the folks on this panel, but also people like Attorney Renee Hanover was still active in Chicago's community, obviously Vernita Gray, and we had, of course, Marie Kuda, the Lion, the roaring lion of our community. So there were many people that were 20, 30, 40 years older than me that were very welcoming when I started coming into this community. But were there people like that for you that were generations before you that inspired you?
Well, I could say,
Jackie Anderson. Of course, Renee Ogletree. And Renee Hanover, which helped me a lot during the time I was picketing the bar. She was one of my new friends. Well, we did date a few times. That helped a lot. That always helps. And who else? I'm trying to think. Marie Kuda, of course. Many of the ones you spoke about were quite active during that time. I was trying to think of who else. It was a woman by the name of Marge Sloan who lives in California. She was real active. I'm trying to remember some other. It was a white woman who lived on Berry. She was real, oh God, what was her name? I can't remember the name at this time. Marge Summit, of course, Marge Summit, right. His and hers, right. And for me, that's all I can think of right this minute.
Okay.
I'm going to name Marie Kuda. I actually took feminist herstory classes from her down at Jane Addams bookstore, which was downtown on Wabash. That was around for many years. So Marie Kuda. Yeah, before you, exactly. And I'm trying to think, well, not that much older than me, but women that had been out in the community before were Sarah Hoagland, and who taught feminist philosophy at Northeastern, Jackie Anderson. She was a great influence. I'm trying to think who else. And Renee and Vernita, for sure, absolutely. McCall Brody. McCall Brody. I'm trying to think who else. Yeah.
Oh, I think I would name those same names. Yeah, those are the same names. But I think the people that I would looked up to were other people who, similar to me, were not out. And how were we surviving? And so, again, it was always for me. It was like we always had people at the house. My house was always open door, and we always had parties and gatherings, and they would turn into. Sometimes for Mother's Day, for example, you'd have a bunch of kids running in and out. It'd be the one time where the kids could be with each other. We could all be lesbians and not be embarrassed. And all the women who were partnered with lesbian moms could sit in a room and talk about what it means to be partnered with a woman who has children, and nobody can be out. And who's going to pick up the kids? And the teacher's going to be disrespectful. And the kids are acting out. And how are we dealing with it? And so for me, I was always looking to those women who were in my house. Help me. How are we figuring this out? And in that way, we were creating community, and we were creating ways of moving forward. Because when one person was hurt, people would pile on and try to help that person to gather strength to move forward. And I think that was the beginning of what activism meant, was to stand up when we could. And it forced some of us to come out. At some point we had to come out. But at the time I didn't. I thought I would be able to stay in the closet forever. I didn't. I was totally out, but the moment I walked into work, I was not. And if somebody figured me out, I'd be like, nah, damn. How did they figure me out?
I was thinking of mentors. I mean, there are some people in the book business that were enormously helpful. There was one out teacher at the University of Illinois when we were in graduate school, and just knowing she was there while we were having this secret affair that just somehow made it okay, just that she was on the faculty. I think one of the reasons I became a single parent in 1986, I have one son, and I'm I'm pretty certain, well, I am certain that one of the reasons I decided to become a single parent is because I knew Mona, I knew Lola, they both had kids, they were single parents. The women I knew who had been in marriages and come out were struggling with custody. Many of them lost their children. And I just, and there were so many divorces in the 70s and early 80s. And so the courts were so unfair to women. I mean, women weren't making enough money. And then if you were doing something as perverted as having a love affair with another woman, you wouldn't get your kids. I mean, you just wouldn't. So I thought, you know, how hard can it be to be a single parent? At least I'll never have to fight with anybody for custody. And I'll never have anybody threaten me to out me. I felt the same way about owning a business too. Nobody's ever gonna out me, you know? But really it was examples that you gals with children who had come in the store with your kids, and your kids seemed pretty normal. It didn't seem like they were, you know, we used to sell a poster that it said, lesbian moms, twice the pie. But yeah, that was a great example, I think. And it was scary, you guys. It was really scary. I mean, you didn't know what would happen to you if you came out. And you could lose your job, and you could lose your kids, and you would lose your friends, some of them. You know, we didn't have any legal protection. And it, you know, so we were forced to create these other social engagements. We were forced to create spiritual groups, sometimes Wiccan spiritual groups or goddess. You know, we were discovering the goddess. Maybe God wasn't a man. And, you know, we had to find alternatives because we were kicked out of the regular institutions.
So we have about 4 minutes or so left, so get your questions ready. So we'll have plenty of opportunity for folks to either say kind of your role in Chicago's lesbian history or questions you might have for the panelists. I think the last question I'll ask is, when I entered the community, there was, and I'm not saying there's not sexism now, because there is, but it was right when AIDS was first, in Chicago anyway, there were fewer than 100 cases of AIDS diagnosed when I started at Gay Life in May of '84. And it was right around the time when people started to put down most of their verbal weapons with each other and came together to fight that and to walk people's dogs or bring them food or visit them in the Illinois Masonics AIDS ward. All sorts of things brought our community together in the 80s and made us much stronger when people ran for office. Tom Keola getting first elected, and then Nancy Katz. And so the 80s were this real up and down, manic decade of terror and death and serial killers and HIV/AIDS, but also that kind of, it was like a vice pushing us together. Yeah. Huge rallies where all genders were represented, all races were represented downtown at Daly Center. Mm-hmm. In the final, a minute or two each, if you can give maybe highlights of whichever decade you want to select, like what was one of your peak moments of feeling this community that often seems that it has no shape or form, but where it felt the most formed for you and inspirational?
Well, this is easy for me because I've told this story before. But I also just want to say, too, the 80s were Harold Washington in Chicago, which was, it opened up so much. And Harold created the Mayor's Commission on Gay and Lesbian Issues. Ann and I served on that commission. And then we had Reagan in the White House. And it just reminds me so much of the times we're living in now, where we have a fascist in the White House and we have a black lesbian mayor. We have one of the most progressive city councils, or getting there, that we've ever had. So it's kind of like the 80s now, where we're progressive, but the general direction of the country is horrible. Anyway, the coming together moment for me was when we moved the bookstore in 1990 to Andersonville. And believe me, the store on Halstead at 1967 North Halstead was full. It was 1,400 square feet, and it was full of books. In fact, it was so crowded that that's why we wanted to move to more space. And we, how do you move a bookstore? Well, we asked for volunteers. We had 4 women who donated their trucks for the entire day. We had 75 volunteers. We started on Friday night. We finished by noon on Sunday, and we went to bed on Saturday. We had women who supplied sandwiches and soft drinks for all the people who were doing the moving. We had, it was overwhelming. The whole damn store got moved and set up in a day and a half, and it was all volunteer. When your friends ask you if you want to help them move, it's like you look for something else to do that day, some other obligation. But not only did they, but they volunteered all day. And books are heavy. And we would have women work in teams, pack up one whole shelf unit, like biographies, pack them in the boxes, go on the truck with the unit and the boxes. When they got to the new location, there'd be somebody to tell them where that unit went, and then they would unload it like they had packed it. It was really cool. It was the most moving day, I think, for me in the bookstore is to see that effort.
Mona?
I don't know. I think it's a continuous flow of moving, and so I worked for Tracy when I first when she had outlines, and I would sell ads, and I realized now that we were helping to build an institution. We were building community, and when I would sell, I would have to sell to straight people who didn't know the value of the gay community. And I would sit in a small room and I would say to them, what is it that you're afraid of? I look in your store and I see all these gay people buying. You could have more of this. What is it that you don't know? Just ask me. We're in this private room, you can ask me. And so I was always doing 101 gay. And I tell you, you would have that conversation and a small business person would buy an ad. And it was like, it would be like, oh my God, they believe in us. So so it's like that incremental kind of growth. At Lambda Legal, when we first opened the office, one of the things that we struggled with was, of course, custody issues. And for some reason, one of the first cases that we won, well, the first case we had was about Billigan Parade. We helped on that. But one of the, we won for a lesbian custody. And for some reason, everybody was out of the office, and I was supposed to make the phone call. So I had to call this woman, call the mother, and tell her that we had won. She had won. And I called her, and I just started to cry. I couldn't even talk. I just started to cry and then I was like, okay, this is Lambda. We won, you won, you've got custody of her. And so moments like that, when Lambda won the $1 million settlement in Wisconsin for the high school in the Bosnia case, $1 million settlement, schools were prohibited, and if they did not protect their children, the gay children, from being bullied, there was $1 million fine that was levied. That was an astounding moment. We were working on marriage, and I was like, no way, we are never going to get marriage. What? And then Tracy helped organize the March on Springfield. We got marriage here in the state of Illinois. We got marriage at federal level. So these are moments where I feel like I have gone from when I first came out, and I just, there still is a lot of violence and suicide and alcoholism, yes. But I feel like there are many more tools now to address that we have so much more hope, we have so many more institutions, and damn, we have legal protections, and we know how to enforce them. And so that gives me so much hope for what the future is, and those moments, participating in creating those moments, securing those rights, have made me feel like there's hope, despite what's in the White House right now.
There's not one moment, but I'm thinking, I just remember the one time we were getting kicked out of the church, and we had a mini fest coming in December, and we had invited all these artisans from all over the country, and so I called Mary York. Some of you may remember her, right? She's passed away. She was, and I said, Mary, we're getting kicked out, and we shouldn't be, and so she came with me to talk to the pastor and convinced him that we should be able to have our mini fest, and then we'd get kicked out, but at least we'd have the mini fest and we wouldn't have to disappoint everybody. And women would come from all over the country and to sell their wares, but also it was women all over the city, south side, west side, north side. We'd all come together that day and in celebration kind of the whole year. And then we'd always have a concert at night, and it was just always great. And then another time was always like the big years at Michigan, where the 10th or the 20th or the 30th, where there'd be 10,000 women, and you'd be singing Amazon, and there were fireworks, and it was just like, you were on top of the world. So, but it's all about community. It is all about community. That's when I always felt the best, when I really felt like we were making community.
I think for me, as I'm sitting there listening to everybody, I thought about the fact of giving these numerous parties that we did, that had I not given a lot of the parties, many of the women that I know, women of color, who came to the events might not have gotten together to do other things. For instance, I know Affinity, they were formed, different groups were formed from the social interaction of my parties. So I never considered myself an activist. People told me I was, and I started to believe it after they told me so many times. But my goal was to just have a social gathering where women could meet, have a good time, and probably have a better time after they left. So that was my main goal, but in the course of doing that, other things developed which I had no control over. So that's one of the things that really stays in my mind.
It's like a magical witch's brew of amazing stuff. I would say my highlights, I can't even pick one. I feel so darn lucky. I can say damn. I feel so damn lucky that I am doing what I wanted to do when I was 10 years old, and I'm doing it out. Like my professor said I couldn't. As somebody said the other day, just tell me I can't do something. Tell Tracy she can't do a March on Springfield, and then you'll hit a March on Springfield. So I've had too many highlights, and I feel so lucky. Let's turn to the audience for some questions. How much time do we have? It is 7:40 now, about.
Yeah, we can go till 8:30, 8:45.
Yeah, and feel free if you have to go, body breaks, go to see the exhibit. Don't feel like you're stuck here like in a lesbian lockdown, which was the last night of Mountain Moving Coffee House. It was like a 4-hour thing that nobody wanted to leave. It was like, it was a lesbian lockdown. But you're not locked down. Feel free to move around, but let's do questions.
Yeah, so I've got a mic, so anyone with a question, just raise your hand and I'll come around you. I can start off with one question. So I am assuming a lot of you had day jobs. How did you keep your energy up to do, all of this extra work, all of this planning, like planning parties, doing all of these, Pat, I know you mentioned you ran a bar as well. Like how did you do all of this? So that's my my question.
Mike's ready.
Well, it actually was invigorating. I mean, you worked, I worked to pay the bills, I did. But then you were just always planning and thinking and organizing. So I had a job as a production manager in an art area. And this was when you had line type and you had to set the type and, you didn't have the computers the way you have it now. You had to, and so anyways, I took my skill and started doing chapbooks. So I saw the Sweet 16 chapbook is out there. That was one that I had produced for Vernita and had done one for Donna Rose and for other artists. And again, it's hard to imagine this, but in particular, women of color artists could not get the word out because print was so expensive, because the layout was so expensive, because every element of that there was a cost to it, and you couldn't get anything for free. So here I had this job, and I was like, So I'd be like, well, if I buy this from you, do you think you could do me a favor and lay out somebody's book? And so, part of my day job at that particular job, I was parlaying into also my activism.
Anybody else? Yeah. I think we want to hear from the teacher. Okay. And the government worker.
Well, basically, I taught school, special ed, and I remember during the time when we had to have, when we would do the mailing for the party. So a friend of mine, the teachers I worked with, we had special ed. So I had the class. One of the lessons was learning how to address envelopes, put the stamp on it, and put the stuff in envelope. It was special ed. And so you teach them how to fold it and put the stuff in it. And that was one of the lessons. And so a lot of the teachers went along with that because that was a way of training. So that helped us out a lot. And then another thing, I was good at taking naps because my parties would be, sometimes we had 3 days a week, like on a Sunday night party, Wednesday, and then we had a Friday party. That was early on. We had 3 different locations. And I would just take a nap, get up, and start. The party would start about 8 and was over 3 or 4, and then I'd go home and take sleep as much as I could, get up and just go, But one good thing, I was in a mobile unit. Mobiles, that's what they had at the time. And so some of the teachers, my friends, I would say, look, watch my class for a few hours or so. I should tell that, but hey, we worked together, and so they would watch my class, and I could take a nap because it was rough. I mean, what can I say? That's it.
Kathy, where did you work?
I worked for the state, social service. But really, the coffee house, which was great, we had so much help. And, it was just really re-energized ourselves every Saturday. And, I'm trying to think, 24 years every Saturday, I did that. But again, all my friends were there. We'd go out afterwards maybe to a party or to the bars or whatever. But, it's just something you did every Saturday night, and it just re-energized you. And so it didn't seem like work. And I always felt like, okay, my social service job is my work, but also this is my lesbian work. And that just felt really good to be able to do that.
Yeah, I waitressed until I could take a big enough salary to support myself and my son. One thing we didn't mention, just because of who's on this panel, we didn't mention sports. And we'll talk Peg Gray. Peg Gray, may she rest in peace. If she just happened to see you, she'd size you up and say, well, now you look pretty athletic. What do you like to play? Do you maybe play basketball? Or, our history is bowling. You know that. You ask your grandma if she ever knew a lesbian, if she was on a bowling team, she'll tell you. Yeah, or softball. There was softball. But the people who organize sports for queers in Chicago, both lesbians and gay men, were just tireless organizers. And I mean, for me, I've always loved to play sports. I played volleyball for years with a lesbian team. It was such a good way to kick back. You were with your friends. You could be out. You could get down and dirty. We had football. I mean, I think there's still football for
Yeah,
lesbians
like
in the
20 different
community.
sports, yeah.
All these sports. And I was on a pool league for a while. There's like 3 different lesbian bars. We'd travel around and we'd shoot pool all night. The sports it really brought a lot of people together.
Every Sunday morning, I remember, right, at Waveland. The Waveland, there was softball every Sunday morning, lesbian leagues and stuff. That was a lot of fun.
Questions?
Before I ask my question, I just want to thank all of you. It meant a lot to have the bookstore to go to, the coffee house, and Tracy, the newspaper that brought a level of respect to the gay community we didn't have before. I, for years, was telling people, don't call it the gay rags. That's just so, you know, and so eventually I convinced my other gay friends not to do that. But I have a question because even we touched on the bars. What do the people on the panel think about what we could do now to create more space? Because there aren't any lesbian bars. We have, you know, we have events that we go to, but do you have any thoughts about that?
Let me just say, there are a whole lot of traveling parties now. And there's also Spinners on Western Avenue is a full-time lesbian bar. I know, it's not everybody's cup of tea. And there are co-gender bars, and there are things like slow-mo and other kind of parties. It is much harder to find community, even though we have the internet. It's weird, right? It's an inverse relation because when we had one place, you know, Outlines or Windy City Times or Nightlines or whatever, that's where they would all put their stuff. Now everybody puts it on their own personal Facebook pages or their own Facebook groups. But if you're not in that, you don't know about it, right? So it's almost harder to build and find community beyond your little niche. It would be interesting to say what your favorite bars were and also where you socialize now. So let's start with, here, you got the mic. Let's start with Pat. Sorry. You have the mic.
Well, basically, since I'm not doing parties like I used to, I don't go out as much because I'm a little older and I really don't have the interest. But the only thing on the south side that women do go to is the Jeffrey Pub, and that's on a Sunday, and that's about it, or the Grand Ballroom, somebody will give an event on Sundays, second Sunday or so. But basically, it's people in little groups that you have to be in their clique or so somewhere, you know. So that's about it.
I wrote down some stuff. Like, you know, obviously Gerber Hart has stuff here. There's the Womb at Affinity, which is spoken word poetry, the third Thursday of the month. There's Sappho's Salon at Women and Children once a month.
Well, no, it's
No?
not once a month anymore, it's quarterly.
Okay, quarterly. There's the Chicago Foundation for Women is hosting the annual International Women's Day dance on March 6th this year at a place called the Beauty Bar at Ashland in Chicago. And there's a Clandestina. That's a group of women who host dances. And this year, there's a benefit for, or this month, there's a benefit for the Puerto Rican Agenda on Saturday, February 29th at Sidetrack, the men's bar. There's also the National Women's Music Festival is over the 4th of July in Middleton, Wisconsin. The Ohio Lesbian Festival, which is usually in Columbus. They're looking for a new space right now. There's also WWTLC is hosting weekly retreats back up at Michigan. At the Center on Halstead, there's a lesbian discussion group called, thank you. And Artemis, come on Artemis.
Thursday night, come talk to us.
Right. And do you have anything planned now for your anniversary?
May 16th and 17th, there are concerts, and we're collecting stories from people, so you can see a flyer.
That's great.
There.
And then just also like besides, and I always look on Tracy's Facebook page, and of course, Windy City Times and The Reader, but there's also Lesbian Connection, and that still publishes on a bi-monthly basis.
Anybody else?
Hi, I was really glad to see that this was about lesbians and feminism. Because I feel like, part of what has happened is that becoming lesbians has now become like commonplace, like completely acceptable. But being a feminist is still pretty controversial. So I was wondering if any of you had anything you wanted to say about that, or kind of how that's changed over the years.
Frankly, feminism is way more popular than it's ever been. Oh my God. Oh my God. Little girl, we sell onesies that say future feminist. I cannot tell you the literature that exists for children about famous women in history. So many women of color. There's anthologies of singers and politicians, and I never thought I would live to see the day that there's so much available, and I can date it to Hillary deciding to run for president. It really started there, and not a whole lot before that. But I mean, they're just knocking themselves out in publishing and self-publishing. That, good night stories for rebel girls. There are rebel girl parties now for 8-year-olds. Little kids take buttons that say feminist. It's cool in a way it never was. So that, yeah. But what I think about, we talked about lesbian feminism, but it was a real philosophy and movement where women, because of their feminism, says to themselves, I said to myself, I'm going to choose to give my energy, sexual, romantic, intellectual, my work life, I'm going to choose to do that for women. I'm going to choose to do that with women and for women. I'm bisexual, so for me it really, really is a choice. But as a feminist, it seemed like the only choice. If I'm going to truly live my life out as a feminist, then I'm going to truly give my energy to it. But certainly there are lots of feminists who are not lesbians, who identify as straight or bi or whatever, or fluid. So not all feminists are lesbians, and sadly, not all lesbians are feminists, although I don't know why not. It always seemed strange to me when I would run into a conservative Republican lesbian, but it really few and far between. But yeah, it was really, those words were joined because they meant we are making this choice about our sexual lives, our preferences, but we're also making this choice about our political choices. And I don't think that really exists right now.
Another group that's still functioning is WACT, Women of All Colors and Cultures Together. It meets once a month in somebody's house, and if you'd like to get on the e-list, give me your email and I'll work on getting you on the list.
If you didn't hear that, it's Women of All Colors and Cultures Together, whacked with 2 C's. It's been around since the... No, you made it? Oh. One C now. I was around when it started with Vivette and some other people.
Somebody tried that.
So anyway, yeah, so they're definitely still around, and you have a Facebook page?
Yes, but I don't know if people will be able to get the emails without,
So
entering.
see Mary up here
So
if
you
you're
can
interested.
give me your email and I'll try to get you on the list.
Once a year, is this on? Yeah.
once a year, the women used to get together and attend the International Women's Dance. And the International Women's Dance was formed by Mona. Remember? And Tracy, and then and this was over 15 years. Women would dress up and look very, very pretty, and women, and now they still have the International Women's Dance, but it's not the same. Right, Mona? We didn't have any money, and Tracy used to do our printing for free or until we could afford to pay her. So that was one event that we used to do.
Wait, I like, yeah, I like that we're talking about institutions that now other people are running. So the bookstore is now run by somebody else. The International Women's Day dance is run by somebody else. The founder of WACT is sitting right here, and somebody behind her is talking about WACT. So you know,
It's very cool.
it's very cool that, some of the institutions or some of the seeds that were planted have taken root, and now they have formed into some other kind of iterations.
More.
I just want to thank you all for doing the panel, for everybody for organizing this panel. For me, it's been wonderful to hear about these years that were so intense and important in my life. I mean, just seeing some of these images is reminding me of how few images we had and how hard, we did have your flyers, I mean, everything had to be done. So, and one of the things you didn't speak about, Pat, that I wanted to mention is once we got on your mailing list, then we would get these letters letting us know when the next things were. And each of the letters had big red lips on the back of them. And that might not seem like much, but it was such a radical thing back then. And I would see that in my mailbox, and I'd be, woohoo! There's another party coming. Yay!
Yeah, I used to kiss everything. Special ed kids did that.
The other thing we have to give Miss Pat credit for, if you noticed I said Miss Pat, her name is Miss Pat. We have to give her credit for the women's, the campaign, the Women of Color tent. There was nothing like the Women of Color.
While we're talking about Miss McCombs, I just want to say, I'm a school social worker in the Chicago Public Schools.
Yes.
I came out during grad school, and a couple years after that, I started going to the Michigan Women's Music Festival. No, before that, sorry, I was assigned to Miss McCombs' school. And I would show up, and back then, most of what we did was work with the kids in special ed. And so I would go to her room to see some of my kids, and I just thought that this teacher, Miss McCombs, was the coolest thing I had ever seen. I stayed. Are you kidding? If Miss McCombs tells you to do something, you do it. But a couple years later, I finally got around to getting to the Michigan Women's Music Festival. And I go through the orientation tent, and there's Miss McCombs. And I'm like, of course, at that point, it terrifies me because someone from work back in the day when we could have been fired for them even suspecting.
Right.
And here's Miss McCombs, and there's that kind of that shock and that immediate fear. But then it was just the coolest thing, Pat, because you made it okay for me to be there. You made it okay to be a lesbian, a dyke, and to be, you made it feel safe enough to be able to go to something like Michigan and not be terrorized by it. And I just want you to know, and I know I've told you this before, but I just want you to know how much that meant to me.
Thank
Hang around for more questions. All right.
Hi, thank you all for doing this and speaking on your experiences. I have a question that's more so directed for Linda. I was wondering how much queer theater or plays that the bookstore held, if any, or if any queer playwrights were circulating around the bookstore?
That reminds me of in the first 5, 6, 7 years of the bookstore, we were always like looking for ways to expand and to do things outside of the bookstore. And one thing we did was produce a play by the Rhode Island Feminist Theater, and it was kind of their take on a 9 to 5. It had queer elements in it, but it was like 5 women, and they were, navigating the workplace and stuff. And there was a big event space called Cross Currents in on Belmont and Sheffield, like just off of Belmont, and these 2 really cool guys ran it, and they just wanted to have all kinds of entertainment there. So we produced that there. Then over the years, we've had a lot of play readings, because we really don't have a stage. But a lot of queer playwrights like Claudia Allen would have readings of their play before they went on to promote. And we have good relationships with Rivendell and some other stuff. So, and then there's open mics in Sappho Salon where we're performing all the time.
Yeah, if you're interested in LGBT theater history, on 132 and 133 in the Out and Proud in Chicago, there's a little bit about Lionheart Theater, which started in '79. Rick Paul is still around in the community, and then there's something on Claudia Allen, who Linda just mentioned. So some of the early pioneer playwrights. A lot of the culture, the organizations like Artemis and the Gay Men's Choruses and the sports groups, it was really the 70s. And it's unbelievable now that so many of them, including Center on Halsted, which started as Horizons, Howard Brown, et cetera, had their roots in that incredible decade of the 70s that are still with us today. So this book kind of gives you an overview of the seeds of all those types of things, including the Billiken Parade and all those kind of groups that started in the 70s. Some of them were not anymore with us, but many of them that still are today. Jen?
Hello. Just had a quick question. Are there any dreams not realized, or are there any issues in particular that you think the current lesbian or queer leadership needs to address?
About 1 million. Let me just say, I think where we have to understand, and I think our community, some parts of it will never get this, but many do, is that because we're the exact reflection of society, we are the most comparable to the disabled rights movement, meaning someone who is blind or someone who is deaf may have different issues, but they fight together at times. And our community is like that. We will come together on the bigger issues, but we forget that there are all these other little issues some parts of us affected by, like trans women of color, murders, and other poverty issues, youth homelessness, senior homelessness. Like every single issue that's out there, there's an LGBT lens on. And what I love about this new generation, including the Black Lives Matter generation, is that it is incredibly intersectional in a real intentional way, not token, but real deep. The 3 founders of the Black Lives Matter movement are queer women themselves. And so they don't leave behind sections of the movement, like the gay movement, and it was really just called the gay movement, did, right? Like we would tackle an issue at a time, and many people were like, oh, we're done. And it was like, there are so many people that are affected in our community by every other thing. So I like that a lot of the next generation you're finding in other movements, but as openly queer. And that's where we are now, and the queer movement needs to keep up with that, or it's going to be left behind. It's going to seem isolation. I'm not going to talk about politics right now, but sometimes there are candidates, it's just that's the only issue, that you just happen to be openly gay. But on everything else, you're not quite there yet on the issues compared to some of your straight allies. So I'm not saying who, I really am not saying who. Vote for who you want.
For me, as a feminist, I just can't believe there's so much violence against girls and women still, and that our girls are not safe. I just feel like what have I done for 40 years if I turn on the television and there's another 6-year-old or a 7-year-old who's missing, and you know why she's missing. You know, that we can't do a better job protecting our girls and young women. I'm hoping all these great books about women in history, they'll be empowering, that girls will, you know, learn how to defend themselves. I know, you know, we took self-defense classes, my business partner and I. That was something that was really available to us. But as a feminist, that's an area where I feel a real failure, that we cannot protect our girl children and our boy children too often.
One last, we got,
Yes.
Hi, this has just been so wonderful. I think I can speak for everybody. Thank you so much to everyone. My question is, I recently, like a couple weeks ago, went to an event called Les Sing, and it had about 40 women. Most of them were on the young side, and they each picked a song and sang it with the track. And the description of the event was lesbian something or other, and it was called Les Sing. But not one of them, when each one before their song said who they were and why they came, why were they, not one of them used the word lesbian to describe herself or themselves. So my question is, are we losing the word? Is there a translation of it in young? Or are we losing the concept?
I'm gonna wade into this one. Look, there are more open lesbians in this country than there ever were in recorded history of this country. That's the truth, right? We have Rachel Maddow, we have Ellen DeGeneres that use those words. When I was starting, there were older generation, and Kuda is one of them, that never liked the word lesbian. She only called herself a gay woman. And that's why it's called Gay and Proud, not Lesbian and Proud, and even Barbara Giddings too. So we go through cycles and generations. If they use queer, if they use polyamorous, whatever the words they use, know that the kids are okay, and they may not talk the way we talk or experience life the way we did. They may define feminism differently, but I am so optimistic because I'm around 20-somethings that it means nothing. Those separations, those labels don't mean anything to them. What I think we do need to make sure is we tell our stories to them, because there are some that do want to use the word lesbian, and they shouldn't be afraid to. Like they don't have the role models I feel like we intentionally have in our lives because of our situations. We had to be around all these different ages and types of people because there weren't as many choices. You didn't hang out with your coworkers at the straight bar after work. You went to Stargaze or Paris Dance or Lost and Found, and so you talked in ways with each other that maybe this next generation just doesn't have. So let's be unapologetically lesbian, but let's not judge how they define it, including, everybody knows in this room, I am so inclusive of gender in that sense. Let's not fight who defines themselves as us. And then there will be more of us.
Did I miss a question over here? Someone have a question over here? No? Any other questions?
Thank you so much for this panel. This is so wonderful. And I'm not from Chicago, so it's so like enriching to learn more about Chicago's LGBT history, Chicago's queer history, queer and lesbian history. Building off of the spirit of the last question, I'm wondering what kind of spaces can we create for like intergenerational conversation amongst queer women? I feel young in this room, even though I'm 30 years old, but I really miss having like older queer women in my life. So I'm sort of wondering how could we make that happen more frequently? Maybe it's at all the events that you all listed that I didn't know about, but to hear more about that would be great.
places, like the Center on Hall-Served Women's Group. I mean, pick one or two that you dig deep into, because when you just go to something once, it's very hard. Women are, in general, pretty shy and nervous of new people. That's my stereotype. You know, we're protecting, right? We're protective. And there's jealousies and, you know, there are cliques. But if you go back and again, a few times to a few places, that's when you build the deep friendships, you know. So I would recommend finding a few. There are definitely ones that are, like Clandestina is put on by several older women of color and a white woman named Brooke Webster that used to do Meow Bar in New York City. She's extremely connected. There's all generations and types of people at those events. They do them like once a month. And most of them are Peach, and all of them want every generation, right? It's just sometimes they tend to attract that. But if you can wear them down, right? You will be welcome in those places if you're not always the new face in those places. I wore a lot of people down, and I just kept coming back. And eventually, you know, you get the friendships and the deep relationships, and then maybe you create something on your own, and you build a network. Like several of us were on a panel about a year and a half or 2 years ago when there was the Dyke Bar exhibit at Reunion, and it was the same conversation. It's like, how do generations get together more? And it's a matter of putting that effort in, putting yourself out there. It's not easy doing that. I have to say I feel very lucky as a journalist. I have like a free pass. I can go anywhere. And I go, hey, I'm covering this. I'm covering this. Yeah. I'm really just here to meet people, but I'm covering this. But figure that out. Be helpful. Put up the chairs. You know, do things that are helpful.
Yeah, I also think there has to be a way that we view people non-judgmentally. Mm-hmm. And I think that as we get older, I think that we are very judgmental, and it comes out. And so I think that I know that when I'm around younger people and they're using language that's different than mine, or they're expressing it in a way that's not, I'm very cognizant to listen and not, and go, I want to, because I want to support them, because I am in awe. I'm in awe of the leadership that these young people are taking on. And they're taking on issues that were so scary to, you know, when I was coming out, and to see these young people leading in these ways. They're not saying things the way that perhaps we would have said them, but I'm like, I just want to support them. And so I think for people who are older, to check yourself, and I can get a little attitude sometimes, but to check yourself, check your little attitude and what you think, how it's supposed to be, and give them space and support them, because they are the generation, they're moving forward. And so I think I can't speak on behalf of the younger people, but I can speak on behalf of people who might be a little older and might have some well-formed opinions based on some experience. There's nothing wrong with that, but I'm just saying, we could afford to listen and support more. That's all.
And we got to let them make their mistakes, because we certainly made them, right? Yeah.
Any other?
One final question there?
Appreciate not having to yell over all these people. I guess my question goes more to the feminist side that we've been thinking of, and this came up organically a lot because this was a lot of women just speaking about their lives and how they live them. My question is more to one of the things you all spoke about was making active decisions to spend your free time with women, to form these spaces for women, to take self-defense classes, to think critically about how you are raising girl children. And I guess as a very young person, I'm 22, because of the work you all did, I've been calling myself a lesbian for 10 years. The first time I came out, I was 12, but I think the ways in which we can consciously enrich our lives as women and as lesbians or bi women or trans women, or really any women who choose to spend their lives with other women, and as someone who's still trying to decide what kind of person I want to be, what are the things that you think I should reach out, choose to do, take self-defense classes, think critically, reach out to other women? Are there things that for you all have really just deepened the meaning of your lives and the way that you can spend it with other women?
Ooh. Good last question. That's a good last question. I'm going to make everybody answer it. So we're going to start with whoever has the mic in front of them.
Okay, some of those places I mentioned, like go to the South Side, go to Affinity, go to Spoken Word, read Windy City and see what events are there, or also, you know, the website of the center, see what's there. Just like open your mind, go to festivals. You know, Madison isn't that far away. That's intergenerational and multiracial, or the Ohio Festival. Read Lesbian Connection. There's all kinds of stuff going on in there. So that's what I would say.
You know, I have to say that all the work that Amigas would have platicas, and so part of the conversation would be about all the issues that were difficult. So we would have conversations about domestic violence, conversations about alcoholism, conversations about all the issues. And in that environment, you would learn about who you are in relationship to that particular topic, as well as looking at individuals and seeing how they perceive it. So I feel like all the work that I've done, working at Lambda Legal to understand how discrimination impacts each one of us, and as a staff person, how to understand how it impacts them. You might have an idea of what discrimination looks like, but for every person who walks in that door, they experience it differently and it impacts their lives differently. So I think for every work experience that I've had in the community, I've been exposed to a better understanding of the depth of our lives in ways that I couldn't even imagine. And that it extends all the way to parties and culture and poetry and dancing and literature, all the ways that are not me, but they are me. And I want to be supportive of it. And so to me, I found that so enriching.
This is more a general answer, but for me, I found that defining my purpose in life, and my purpose was to promote women's literature and help women as I could through the dissemination of literature. And then anytime there was an opportunity to do something, I could ask myself, if I say yes to this, does this further my purpose? If it's not going to further my purpose, then probably somebody else should do this, and I should say no to it. And we did that in terms of how we chose who would present programs at the store. You know, believe me, people wanted to have seminars on selling real estate, seminars on flipping houses. How about I do a workshop on astrology? How about I do a workshop on massage? And, you know, does that promote women's writing? Does that promote feminism in women's literature? No. So, say no. You know, maybe find another place where you would find people who want to hear about astrology. You know, it's like have a purpose, and then you can decide, does it further it or does it?
I would say, first of all, when I first came out, I didn't know too much. And what I did was indulge myself in the community in terms of going to different events. It can be risky. Of course, I went to a lot of places by myself, which it was. But you have to take certain risks in order to learn certain things. One example is I went to a meeting and it said S&M in the flyer, but I didn't really know what it was. But I know it had to do with women, and so I wanted to go. And so after I got there, I learned so much. But had I not taken the risk to just go and find out for myself, I might not have learned a lot of things, which I was excited about. Learn those things. But I'm just saying, you have to just go out there and experience it. The bad, the good, the ugly, or whatever. It would help to mold you in terms of what you want to do.
So I want to give one resource. ChicagoGayHistory.org is this website. I was burned out after the gay games. Let me just tell you, in 2006, I had spent 7 years of my life volunteering for a community that was just pissed me off at every turn. And I was just like, why am I in this community? Why am I giving my whole life to it? And so I said, oh, I'm in it for the people. So I set out the summer of 2007, interviewing 200 people on video. And so on the ChicagoGayHistory.org website, under the biographies button, these 4 folks are here, and many other folks like John D'Amelio, the head of Gerber Hart Library, and other people in this room. I stopped because I ran out of money, but there's 200 on there, and there's all these books as well. I realized I was doing it for the people. And after that summer, which was exhausting, I was re-energized in doing it. So it's for the people, right? Community's too amorphous. Like, I do this for the community. No. Community can, like, destroy your soul sometimes. And it's, yeah. But let me also disabuse you of, like, a notion that we might have presented up here that there were, like, a lot of things going on. And a lot of people doing those things. ACT UP, for example, has this reputation of, like, huge, right? Huge, right? Their meetings were like 20 people. And when there were 80, it was chaos. And their marches and their events were often very small actions. But it does only take one lesbian to change a light bulb and the world. And there were some lesbians that were all powerful, that unto themselves, they would go from group to group to group and spark change, and were horrible to work with, right? But they did what they had to do the way they did it. And what I would encourage people is to treat our community like you would treat your family. There are some people you don't want to go to Thanksgiving to be with, and there are other people you would die for. And find those people. And there are a lot of people you're going to find that are going to be like, oh my God, I cannot be in a group with them. There are other groups. There are more LGBT groups. There's more LGBT spaces. They're maybe a little bit harder to find, but there's more than ever before. And if you can't find one that fits you, make your own. And you have ways now that you can make that happen. Literally, organizations of 5 people changed our world in this town. And so don't think it was thousands. It was a few people in different select places that made the community we have today. And I can't thank the 4 up here enough for the impact they had on my life and for being here tonight and sharing on a cold and snowy night. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being here.
All right, so Gerber Hart's open till 9, so if you haven't had a chance to check out the library and this exhibit, please feel free to do that, and thank you all for coming here tonight. Really appreciate it.